If you smell what the plug is brewing. Yes, great ones. Sparkplug Coffee continues to sponsor our podcast, and we're happy to tell you that they have the freshest beans in all of Canada. And these dudes are fairly traded premium Arabica beans that will be delivered to customers in the US and Canada within a week. The shipping cost to anyone in this country of Canada is zippo, nada, nothing. Yes, I'm a Canadian. Live with it. If you need to keep it calm, you can get decaf or even Goldilocks it and go for some half calf. They've got all kinds of roasts and blends. They've even got rotating seasonal blends, so you can try something different in the spring, summer, fall, or winter. But Rock, your best move is to become a member of the Autopilot Coffee Club. That'll get you perks and deals that the uncommitted are not going to get. Nor will those people save money on every order like you members will. But you can end this commitment anytime you want. You can even just pause it if you've got your fingers in a lot of pies like The Rock does, and don't think you're going to be around to bring your orders in off the porch. You see, what I'm saying is, this isn't a dumb Coffee of the Month club. So don't be a jabroni. Use your rippling hand muscles to make your fingers type sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Our HYES promo code will save you 20% off your very next order. All right, Andrew Luther, everyone wants to smell what you're cooking. Cookin', so fire up your electronic theme song to get this puppy going. And action! Have you ever seen? Hello, one and all, and thank you for checking out this special edition of Have You Ever Seen? The 509th podcast on this channel will be reviewing a movie today, Moana, but after that I'll be digging into Dwayne Johnson's film career to see just how well his movies have done financially. And who is the person who will be doing these things? You probably know if you're any kind of regular listener. Well, I am the warrior, trickster, and shapeshifter known as Maui, but far better known as Ryan Ellis. Not the hockey player. He's not a podcaster, or maybe he is, I don't know, I never looked him up that way. When I look up my name, it's always that guy. It'll just be me talking to you today, incidentally. My wife Bev is at work while I yap away. Regular listeners will certainly understand the routine by now, that I review movies on my own every couple of weeks. Although rather than putting this episode up on Friday the 5th, Cinco de Mayo, I'm doing it on The Rock's birthday. The man is, believe it or not, 51 today. That dude is 51. Happy birthday, dear Rock. Happy birthday to you. But before I get to the number crunching and box office analysis, let's talk about Moana, which was released by Disney on November 23rd, 2016. Now you might be asking why I chose to cover this one, especially since this review comes out the day after Bev and I talked about another animated movie set in water, Finding Nemo. Both big successes, but Nemo's the more famous film. Well, Moana has the best score on the tomato meter for a Dwayne Johnson movie. I really like his two wrestling movies, Beyond the Mat and Fighting with My Family, although it's worth noting that he's playing himself in those and he's not the main character in either case. He is playing a character in a way because The Rock is, as they always say, himself with the volume turned up. I don't really believe that with that guy. I think he's really performing more than most wrestlers are because he seems like a sweetheart. And the character's not. I did talk about, and mostly raved about, those two wrestling movies on my other podcast, by the way. Yep, you can find chats about Beyond the Mat and Fighting with My Family on Scoring at the Movies. Another reason to yammer about Moana is that I'm just not the biggest fan of a lot of the man's motion pictures. I do like that Dwayne Johnson takes chances. Well, he used to. And has accepted challenging character roles in things like Be Cool and Southland Tales. That was a long time ago. Be Cool was out of his comfort zone in those early days of his thespianing, partly because he was playing gay, which I'm guessing couldn't have been easy for a macho pro wrestler to do. I can't see Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin, even maybe John Cena, possibly Batista, doing those things, but not the guys that came before The Rock who got into movies. So I don't think Roddy Piper would have done it. I could take or leave just about any of the Fast and Furious films, though. Blasphemy! I know they're so popular. And even though he's fun in Jumanji, and Jungle Cruise, and Journey to the Mysterious Island, and probably other J movies, he's pretty much doing the same thing in both of them as he is in, say, Red Notice. Are these movies bad? No. Do I think I'll ever watch any of them again? No. Well, maybe Jumanji. Yeah, maybe some of those are bad actually anyway, too. But Jumanji, no, pretty good. And the sequel wasn't bad either. So how about Moana's critical reception and its box office haul? It's got 95% from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes and 89% from the audiences. It's a large sample from the critics, too, because 286 of them have reviewed the flick. Their average is a strong 7.9 out of 10. It just missed out on making the top 10 of the 2016 US box office, finishing about $22 million behind another animated flick, Sing. It was the year of the cartoon because half of the top 10 at the box that year were animated films. Moana raked in 248 million smackers here at home and 643 mil worldwide. It ranked 12th that year worldwide, although phenomenons like Finding Dory, Zootopia, or Zootropolis if you have Disney Plus like I do, and see, what is that movie? Oh, they rebranded it for some reason. And The Secret Life of Pets all did way better than even Moana, Sing, or Kung Fu Panda 3 did, and no one can throw shade on the dollars those three flicks earned. Moana was nominated for 2 Oscars, Best Animated Feature and Lin-Manuel Miranda's catchy song, How Far I'll Go. I like that song. Zootopia won the award for Animated Feature, and I would have voted for that myself, while City of Stars, from La La Land won for Best Song, and I would have voted for that too. Ron Clements, John Musker, Don Hall, and Chris Williams all had directing credits on this, although Hall and Williams were listed as co-directors, which must be why they weren't nominees for Best Animated Feature the way Clements and Musker were. Pixar directors often have quote-unquote co-directors, but they don't seem to get Oscar nominations along with the main director. There must be some weird rule about that. Anyway, those 4 guys all have story credit on this, but Jared Bush is the man who actually wrote the screenplay. Of course, I'm sure dozens of people wrote that, but he's the one that was actually credited with the final script. He was also one of 3 guys credited with writing Zootopia. Monster year for that dude. Clements and Musker wrote and directed The Little Mermaid way back in 1989, the white version. Oh my God, they're making her black. I'll never get over that. So they know how to make a movie about pretty and fierce young girls spending their days in and on the ocean. And Hall and Williams won the Animated Feature Oscar for Big Hero 6 2 years before Moana came out. So all these guys have an impressive pedigree in the genre. And, of course, they really did direct some great animation here, too. We know Dwayne Johnson is the big draw here as Maui, but the title character is played by Auli'i Cravalho. This was Cravalho's first job in movies. Most of her credits since have been on TV, although she did voice Moana again in Ralph Breaks the Internet a couple years after this came out. Rachel House is the wise old Grandma Tala. Her first movie was Whale Rider, which we covered a few years ago, but she's also since been in Thor Ragnarok and Hunt for the Wilder People, a favorite of Bev's. We haven't reviewed those, but they're funny flicks. Tamura Morrison is Moana's pup, Chief Tui. He's been playing the Fets, Django and Boba, in various Star Wars properties for over 20 years now. Jermaine Clement, who was in another watery movie, Avatar 2, or Avatar the Way of Water, just last year, is Tamatoa, the clam. If Bev was here right now, she'd pipe up at this point that Clement is best known for Flight of the Conchords, Ryan. Okay, she's probably right. I only saw a little bit of that show. It was good. Nicole Scherzinger voices Cena. She does a voice in Ralph Breaks the Internet, so working with Cravalho again, and she's also in Be Cool with The Rock, although the Pussycat Dolls is a credit I see over and over again in her IMDb profile. Voiceover maestro Alan Tudyk is the voice of Hey Hey, Moana's chicken friend, her stupid chicken friend. He gets to perform a bunch of tomfoolery in this, as he has in many animated movies. The guy's a master of this genre. Tudyk has more than 130 different film and TV credits since he got started in 1997, but I bet fanboys remember him most fondly for playing Wash on Firefly, and in the movie based on that show, Serenity. So that's the fairly small cast and some of the frontline crew members. To broadly state it before I dig into the plot, I enjoyed watching this. Easy 3 stars out of 4. Although it's funny, I know I saw it before, yet in my notes, I have a list of all the movies I've ever seen. It wasn't in there. I must have erased it or didn't bother rating it back when I first saw it. I'm sure I would have given it 3 stars then too. I wasn't crazy about it, no, but it's fun and the animation is phenomenal, just as it is in Finding Nemo, which we covered yesterday. Water and fire used to be so hard for animators to do believably, so here's a huge tip of the cap for these artists to be able to do it this well now, and for that matter, back 20 years ago during Finding Nemo. Of course, I say now, but Moana is nearly 7 years old. Just how gorgeous will animated oceans be in movies made in the years yet to come? And speaking of looking great, cartoons are, I think, legally bound to make a main character attractive, especially if she's a girl, or in particular, a woman. But this pretty young thing is a case of the somewhere out there's, somewhere out there, and wants to leave her tropical island. She's basically the man in black from Lost, although I don't think she'd kill everybody just to get her own way. And that's my nutshell of this movie, by the way. I'll do it nice and early this time. So Moana, in a nutshell. Should I stay or should I go now, go now, go now? This is a girl who loves her family and loves her people, but the call of the far off is strong. If I go, there will be trouble, Daddy be mad. Although any musical comedy about a character wanting to run away from the only world she's ever known pretty much has to come down to that person deciding that they, in the end, do want to go back home. Look at the Tom Hanks arc. Over and over again in his movies, he's trying to get home. Although, I guess generally speaking, he's not trying to get away from there to do other things, but anyway, he's got to get home. And since her quest is to convince the demigod Maui to return the heart of the goddess Tafiti to that goddess so that Moana's people's crops will grow again and fish will fill the fishermen's nets like they used to, she decides to disobey her dad and makes like Tom Hanks in Castaway by going beyond the reef. You don't do that, but she's going to. And someone on that island clearly needed to do this. If you can't eat, you're going to die. So you might as well risk at least one person's life to see if they can fix this problem. Maybe he wouldn't have picked his daughter, but somebody's got to do it. Grandma is the kind of in-touch-with-nature character who knows better than everyone else. She inspires Moana to Well, ignore her father. Moana goes to a secret place on the island and bangs the drum slowly. Ryan Ellis podcasting superfans should get that reference, if I have any superfans. I bet the hockey player does. And she discovers that her ancestors were not landlubbers. They were voyagers who did travel the sea. What a twist! Grandma's dying wish is for Moana to indeed restore the heart of Te Fiti, so the girl sets out to do that with this film's version of Wilson! The stowaway chicken, hey hey. The idiot bird nearly gets Moana killed a few times before she takes charge and stashes him in a hole in the boat. Why didn't Chuck think to do that with Wilson and Castaway? He wouldn't have had to buy a new volleyball once he got home. Wilson 2. Moana is shipwrecked after a vicious thunderstorm, but the ocean, which has its own abyss-like tentacle character in this movie, which is fun, led her exactly where she needs to be, because here's the tattoo festooned Maui. I love that word, festooned. I use that quite a bit, and I use tomfoolery quite a bit, as you've probably noticed lately. His tats provide some comedy, too. They have a mind of their own. The Rock's character appeared in the prologue, of course, but he doesn't get his first line until the 36-minute mark. Wrestling fans know Dwayne can sing, and he proves it by warbling, "You're welcome," his ditty where he brags about being a demigod, which ends up being an excuse to distract Moana, throw her into a cave, and steal her boat to get off his, well, rock. If you smell that I gotta leave my rock. Luckily, she's able to escape, and the ocean helps out by propelling her onto her boat, which Maui is expertly captaining. She, of course, isn't very good with boats yet, but she will be. They deal with tiny pirates who start out as cute little coconuts, but just like the creatures on that planet in Galaxy Quest, they get vicious. We have to get out of here before one of those things kills Guy. They're coming for the heart of Te Fiti, which Hei Hei helpfully swallows. A chase ensues and Moana gets Hei Hei back, but just barely, as is always the way. It'd be no fun if this task was a breeze. The movie'd be a lot shorter, too. If her quest is that heart thing, then Maui's quest is to find his magical hook. How about teamwork, Eminem? Although things just get stranger, as Moana ends up being grabbed by an enormous clam. This is the Jermaine Clement character, Tamatoa. Maui does get his hook back and can thus shapeshift again, although not of his own free will, like he used to be able to do. It's glitchy, so things certainly aren't hunky-dory just yet, and how could they be? The movie has over a half an hour left. The M's are discouraged and have a heart-to-heart, which is constitutionally required at this point of any formula movie, and while I enjoyed this film, it is following a formula. We get an upbeat musical montage which, as we know, fixes everything. For a little while, at least. Maui even teaches Moana how to sail the boat, but naturally, in a comical way. But doggone it, they're discouraged again when Maui's all-important hook gets wrecked. He turns into a hawk and flies away. When a very sad Moana tells the ocean it needs to choose someone else because she failed, the ghost of Grandma appears to pep her up by singing a song. You must avenge my death, Kimba. Daibin, Simba. Daibin, Moana. It's a good song here, actually, and Moana is now re-energized. How many re's? I don't know. Lots of re's. Maui comes back into our heroine's life right when Moana is facing the fiery Te Fiti. What a twist. Moana makes a parting of the Red Sea type thing happen so she can sing at Te Fiti, then inserts the heart back where it belongs. And it works because vegetation and life are restored immediately. Maui genuinely apologizes for his petty theft, and his reward is that he gets his hook back in one piece. Hugs! Maui hawks up and takes off again. We'll see this brawny dude again in the live-action remake that's going to cost Disney a lot of money. Well, with all the scenes set on the ocean and the special effects they'll have to do to come close to showing what this animated movie shows. Anyway, Moana sails home and gets a hero's welcome from her adoring parents and, well, everybody else. And what do you know? Now everybody's into the idea of sailing into the deep blue sea. I mentioned Whale Rider earlier in this podcast. Well, this ending reminds me of Whale Rider. And Moana might be new at boating, but she's as close to an expert as these landlubbers have. And that's that. Fun film. And by the way, I don't think I said this when I did the cast, but I was reading, and it's pretty evident if you look at their pictures, that almost everybody in this movie is a person of color. And I think generally speaking from, what do you call it, the Pacific, the Rock, of course, is Polynesian. He's part black, part Samoan. That was obviously a deliberate move, although I think all those directors are white. And the writer probably too. Anyway, I like Moana. I didn't laugh out loud at this almost at all, but I bet any money that kids laugh a lot at the chicken and the antics of the two M's. I smiled at that stuff at least. It's fairly long for a cartoon, although I have to admit that 85-minute animated flicks aren't the standard anymore anyway. I always think of the default classic Disney movies or even a lot of the Pixar stuff as 85, 90 minutes, sometimes even shorter, but they're not really like that anymore. Sometimes they go a full 2 hours these days, and prestige pictures go a lot longer than that, as we know. I mentioned Avatar 2. I went to the washroom twice during that because it was over 3 hours long. Anyway, I can make an educated guess that the flick is well loved on Disney+. It must be, if they're willing to invest what will have to be a tremendous amount of money into a live-action version, and I look forward to seeing Alan Tudyk dress up in a chicken costume. Quick aside before I move on, was Maui even real? No human other than Moana ever sees him, Plus, he is a demigod, and those don't just pop up in our lives every day. Maybe he was just a figment of her fertile imagination, and she did all this on her own, including maybe the Taviti thing not being real. No, that's probably real. I just wonder, though, because yes, he's seen and dealt with by other creatures, but not other humans. The Rock is Tyler Durden. Okay, he's not, but it was a fun thought. Okay, that was Moana. So now back to my point of doing this Dwayne Johnson-centric podcast in the first place. I started doing research for this, I think, last year. And I didn't know when I was going to post it, and I thought, his birthday makes sense, right? Because I don't think he has a movie coming out for quite a while yet. I would have aimed for that, but I'm not sure he has anything for many months. Let me explain why I'm going to sift through how his movies have done at the box office. What's the point of this, right? Well, I've let it be known before, especially on my sports movie podcast, Scoring at the Movies. I'm a lapsed wrestling fan. Actually, lapsed is debatable because I always keep up with what's going on through YouTube clips of people's podcasts, even though I haven't watched an entire wrestling show on TV in over 10 years. And I used to listen to actual podcasts, Steve Austin, Chris Jericho. Haven't in a long time with those people, Jim Ross as well. Bruce Pritchard, gave up on all those guys. I've heard clips on YouTube here and there sometimes. Of course, I'm a big Mick Foley guy, so I burn through his podcast on YouTube sometimes. When I moved in with Bev in 2012, I stopped watching WWE altogether. I just cold turkeyed it. I'd been a loyal fan for over 20 years, but I was a bit embarrassed that I was still watching it every week. I also just didn't care about it the same way anymore. I wasn't very interested in who they were promoting as their top stars. Wasn't the biggest John Cena fan. And a lot of my friends who were fans of it, I wasn't really in touch with them anymore, so I didn't have that connection with them or with anybody really that cared. I knew having a fiancé and a dog and a house was going to sap the time I had been spending on wrestling.
Yeah, sure, blame poor Fox.
Yes, Fox, it's your fault. So during these past 10 years, while The Rock's movie career took off, I've kept hearing the old-timers, Steve Austin, Jim Cornette, Bruce Pritchard, and others, mispronounce verbiage, but also it's not verbiage, it's verbiage, but also say over and over and over again that Dwayne Johnson is the biggest star in the world. In fact, those guys have made that statement about The Rock more than MGM ever said it about Clark Gable back in the 30s. In Gable's case, though, it was actually true, as it has been with Tom Cruise and Robert Downey Jr. in more recent times. I think it's true about Eastwood back in the day. A lot of huge names could really claim to be the box office king. Tom Hanks could have said that for a while there. Cruise was in the biggest movie just last year, despite being in his 60s now, and people weren't tuning in to see Jennifer Connelly or Miles Teller. It was to see Tommy fly jets. Audiences made Cruise the actual biggest star in the world last year, a perch he's held at other points in his long career too. Think of the original Top Gun, which was the biggest hit of 1986, or even Rain Man 2 years later, which was #1, but also won Oscars, including, of course, Best Picture. But is that true with Dwayne, though? Has it ever been that he is the top star? He's undeniably a big player in Hollywood, and he never seems to stop working or working out. But is there evidence to show that he is in fact the biggest movie star in the world? And am I taking Austin, Cornette, and the others too literally? Well, probably. I do that. They always just say biggest star, too, so they could be claiming that he's #1 when you incorporate all he does with acting and producing and working on TV shows and relaunching the XFL and occasionally even still wrestling. So yes, I am taking those guys too literally, as I do. But when you say something like that as often as Cornette and Austin and others have, you either sound like you want to big up your friend, or you're just repeating a company line without having credibility to back it up. And if you know me, you know I'm a pedant. Words have meaning, including verbiage. When you say someone is the biggest movie star in the world, I think that means one of two things. Either you're often the box office champion of any given year, or your movies consistently open to #1 when they first come out. They win the weekend, as the fella says. Well, I can tell you right now that Dwayne Johnson has never been in the biggest hit of the year. Fellow former wrestler Dave Bautista has, by virtue of his supporting appearances in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Of course, those movies would have been monster hits whether the monstrous Bautista was in them or not, but is that not also true of most of The Rock's biggest hits? When he came into the Fast and Furious franchise in 2011, which was Fast 5, those absurd action extravaganzas started to make even more money than they ever had before. If you want, you could say that was about Mr. J. If that's your choice and that's why you watched, okay. But the filmmakers had already added big names like Gal Gadot, Tyrese, and Ludacris to the ensemble, not to mention continuing to bring back Vin Diesel and Paul Walker. Both guys missed some of the earlier Fast flicks, but by 2011, they were the keys to the whole franchise. Am I a huge fan of theirs? No. But are they the keys? Yes. What I'm saying is, this thing was its own brand by 2011. Charlize Theron, Helen Mirren, and Kurt Russell have been great additions in the more recent films. That's some credibility. But it feels like the Furiousers, that's a hard one to say, not even a word, Furiousers, would have succeeded whether any of those great stars were in the sequels or not. But the Fast franchise does represent Dwayne Johnson's biggest hit worldwide during a calendar year. Furious 7 was #3 across the globe in 2015, and The Fate of the Furious, so that's the 8th one, also got to #3 in 2017. Part 7 was the bigger of those two films, by the way, by quite a bit, really. Monster, global hit. A couple others in the Fast and Furious franchise were in the top 10 worldwide as well, so whether I think they're good movies or not, and I don't, audiences always lap them up. The fast flicks aren't quite as beloved here at home, United States and Canada, as they are in other countries, by the way, but it's not a big difference. Well, sometimes it actually is. I'll go through that in a minute. Yeah, I wrote that down earlier and looking last night. No, sometimes internationally it's a monster difference, especially in one case. But even if you want to make the argument that Dwayne Johnson entering that series helped turn 4 of them into global phenomenons, it's not like F9 didn't score up a whole whack of eyeballs too, even though Johnson had left the franchise to do Hobbs and Shaw, and to avoid having to work with Vin Diesel again. Interestingly, the rockless F9 didn't even break even here at home. It was about $27 million short of that. But audiences in other markets didn't seem to give a crapola if Rocky and Jay Statham weren't around anymore. Fast 9 made $730 million worldwide. That's right, Statham, of course, entered the franchise at different points as well, so another big name that they brought in to help make people want to see these films. But I think the true measure of a leading man or leading woman is how well your film does when you are the undisputed headliner, not your gravelly-voiced frenemy. So even though the 2 Jumanji reboots have an ensemble cast, with Kevin Hart, Karen Gillan, and Jack Black doing as much to make them successful as The Rock did, Johnson was the first name on the call sheet in those. And Rocky delivers. Welcome to the Jungle ended up 5th across the planet in 2017, while the sequel, The Next Level, finished 10th. But those are the major successes. Here's where Austin and Cornett's argument about this biggest star thing doesn't really hold water. Not only has Johnson never had the biggest hit of the year, or even the second biggest hit of the year, but when you just talk about his star vehicles, they never even make the top 10 worldwide. Black Adam, Hobbs and Shaw, and Moana got close, but they peaked at 15th, 11th, and 12th respectively. Okay, so how do many of Rock's movies do just here in North America? Well, the closest he gets to actually being the top dog is Jumanji, The Next Level, which got as high as number 4. He has appeared in 6 films that finished in the top 10 domestically. After the Fast and Jumanji flicks, his most impressive is probably Black Adam. He's clearly the main man in that one, and it ranked 11th just last year, although it didn't even make its money back domestically. Even when you do account for the worldwide take, Black Adam wasn't what you'd call a juggernaut. Now, you can't say Dwayne Johnson's movies tend to flop, except when he does quieter, character-driven pieces that aren't really intended to be box office titans in the first place. And yes, the studios probably weren't expecting Snitch and Gridiron Gang to rake it in, but neither of them even finished in the top 100 around the world those years. But as for his movies that do tend to bring in the bucks, the action flicks, I wouldn't have thought that mediocrities like Rampage would wind up 22nd worldwide in 2018, or that G.I. Joe Retaliation would be 18th across the globe in 2013. Of course, Rampage was a popular video game, and G.I. Joe is a name brand. I was a big fan as a kid, so they had that going for them from the start. And hey, I never intended to imply that the Great One isn't a draw at all. He certainly is. But how about names like Kristen Bell, Sam Worthington, Daisy Ridley, Elijah Wood, and Daniel Radcliffe? They were the headlining names in several of the biggest hits globally since Dwayne Johnson started acting in 2001. Would anyone say that Worthington, Wood, and Radcliffe were the reasons that Avatar, the Lord of the Rings series, and all those Harry Potters were monster successes? That depends on how you feel about their talents, I guess. Although if teensy tiny Elijah Wood wanted to puff out his chest in 2003 and say, "I'm the man, Rock, not you," it's not like he'd be wrong. He was the leading character in the blockbuster of that year, Return of the King. Of course, in Kristen Bell's case, it was a voiceover role in a Disney musical which happened to have killer songs, that being Frozen. So she was good, but that was probably going to sell anyway. Plus, I would argue Sam Worthington brought Avatar down. Well, okay, Cameron's script actually did that. And hey, what if Dwayne Johnson had been chosen to play Jake Sully? Or Anna in Frozen? Well, that one wasn't going to happen, not the Anna one. Physically, he's already a special effect, so he would have fit right in the Avatar world. All right, so let's find out what was the number 1 movie each year worldwide during Dwayne Johnson's first 22 years of acting. In 2001, number 1 was Radcliffe's Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, although in America, of course, it was Sorcerer's Stone. The Rock had that tiny role in The Mummy Returns, his first ever movie, which wound up 7th. He can't really brag about that number, though. Brendan Fraser can, not Dwayne Johnson. He also can't brag about the CGI they used on him when he turns into the Scorpion King. I'm sure he didn't. No one would. In 2002, the honey was Elijah Wood's Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Meanwhile, Dwayne had his first starring role in The Scorpion King, which got to 27th at the box office. In 2003, we just said this, Lord of the Rings did it again, this time with Return of the King. DJ's flick The Rundown ended up 67th. 2004 was the year that Shrek 2 was top of the heap around the world. Rocky's Walking Tall was 92nd. Okay, 2005. Harry Potter was back on top, this time with The Goblet of Fire. Johnson did steal the show from all those established stars and Be Cool, but the film only got to 57th, while Doom wound up 86th. In 2006, Johnny Depp's Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest was somehow the biggest film of the year. One of Rock's failures, Gridiron Gang, which Chris and I were going to cover on Score at the Movies but never did, and we're not going to now, only got to 120th. And it's a supporting part, but at least he tried to stretch and do something way different in Southland Tales. although that movie didn't even register on Box Office Mojo. It apparently didn't even gross $400,000 worldwide. That may have been the last time he ever really took a chance, though. I wouldn't say the Game Plan was really taking a chance, or Tooth Fairy. Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End was the world's top banana in 2007. Again, I don't really know why. Dewey's The Game Plan was a respectable 39th. While The Dark Knight ended up having bragging rights as the best at the box office in 2008. You want to know how I got this money in my pocket that I'm going to burn? Johnson had a fun supporting part in the Steve Carell adaptation of the TV series Get Smart, which was popular enough to end up finishing 27th. What about 2009? That was the year of one of the hugest moneymakers ever, Avatar. Rocco's Race to Witch Mountain only got to 53rd, while his voice work in Planet 51 was right behind it at 54th. We're on to 2010. Toy Story 3 was not only the best movie of the year, it made the most dollars. As for Our Man, Johnson did a lot of acting that year. He had that small but hilarious cameo with Sam Jackson and the other guys, which got to number 42. Tooth Fairy wound up 59th, while Faster only got to 142nd. So this is before he started working in the Fast movies, a movie called Faster. 2011 was the year of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, blockbuster. Rock's first time in the Fast films, Fast 5, as I just said, got to number 7. The Avengers dominated in 2012. Dwayne's Journey to the Mysterious Island journeyed to 23rd place and was far more popular abroad than it was here on North American soil. Here comes 2013, and here comes Frozen. Let it go, let it go. Dwayne Johnson worked a ton that year. His Fast and Furious 6 was number 6. G.I. Joe Retaliation was 18th. Pain and Gain got as high as 80th, while Snitch only got to 113th. Although that picture had a small budget, so it actually did okay, dollar for dollar. Pain and Gain might not have been a success in 2013 for Michael Bay, Mark Wahlberg, and The Rock. I think also Anthony Mackie. But the next year in 2014, Mike and Mark did have the number 1 flick worldwide, which was Transformers: Age of Extinction, while Johnson's Hercules muscled up to number 34. We probably all remember that Star Wars: The Force Awakens was the king, or queen, of 2015. For The Rock, The Honey was Furious 7, getting all the way up to number 3 globally, while his starring role in San Andreas finished in 16th place. San Andreas was another example of meh here at home, but pretty huge when it got released in other markets. 2016, the year of Moana, was the year in which Captain America: Civil War was number 1 in the world. I already said to you that Moana was 12th, while Rocky and Kevin Hart's Central Intelligence, pretty funny movie, only got as high as 41st in 2016. Star Wars: The Last Jedi, despite its controversy, ruled all in 2017. Rocky's The Fate of the Furious was only 2 spots behind it at number 3. Well, really, Vin Diesel's, but Rock's in it. While Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle got to number 5. That's as good a year as Johnson has ever had. Although, curiously, Fate of the Furious didn't even cover the budget with what it made in North America, but earned $1 billion more. $1 billion more than the $226 million it made domestically. In fact, I think a little bit more than $1 billion more. That's insane! Why do people in other countries like this franchise so much? The next 2 years were all about the Avengers. Infinity War was number 1 in 2018, while Rocky's Rampage was 22nd, and Skyscraper wound up 34th. 2019 was Avengers Endgame doing the dominating. DJ's 2 films were back-to-back on the box office list, number 10 and number 11. Pretty good year there, too, then. They were Jumanji: The Next Level and Hobbs & Shaw, although a sequel and a spin-off of a prior franchise. And guess what? Hobbs & Shaw did not recoup its budget in the continent I call home. It made almost $600 million more internationally. The Rock didn't have a movie come out in 2020, so we'll go past that. 2021 was the year of Spider-Man: No Way Home. Johnson got 2 movies into the top 20, although the first one is a little dubious to include here. That's because he did a favor for Ryan Reynolds, I think, after working with him on Red Notice, and did a voiceover cameo in Free Guy, which was 14th. But Jungle Cruise is his movie, well, he and Emily Blunt, and it ranked 19th. Jungle Cruise has such a monster budget that its 220 million smackers worldwide barely covered the production costs. So, failure. Of course, 2021 and even 2022 were skewed by the pandemic, just like 2020 was. Probably even more so, really, when you think about production. Not all theaters were open, and people haven't returned to seeing movies even now on the big screen in the consistent numbers they did before the virus swept the planet. Sure, they'll go see Spider-Man or Top Gun or Avatar, and then sometimes big surprises like a horror movie, Megan, Barbarian. They did very well. Smile, people were surprised how well that did. But post-2020 box office performance is often a mystery compared to trends in the before times. And while last year was the year of Top Gun Maverick, Black Adam did wind up 15th, and DC League of Super Pets finished at 23rd for Rockalicious. Yet here's another point of order, Your Honor. Black Adam did not make its budget back domestically, and while it did cover it internationally, it wasn't the huge hit that I think DC and The Rock claim it was. And if I recall, they're not making another one with him, even though he expected they would. That's true also for DC League of Super Pets. It barely broke even here at home, and its worldwide haul covered those costs, but not by that much. I didn't include every single one of his movies during that year-by-year breakdown, incidentally. For instance, Baywatch tanked domestically, but made about 2.5 times its budget worldwide, so that's not dreadful, but it's not as good as they were hoping for, now with him and Zac Efron and that name brand of Baywatch. Red Notice has apparently been popular on Netflix, but they never tell us how popular, how many streams it had, and so on. It had a small theatrical run, but we don't really know how well it did. To praise Fighting with My Family again, I enjoyed that movie immensely, but it didn't light the world on fire, although across the globe it made almost 4 times what it cost, so that's a decent return on a small investment. Beyond the Mat was pretty financially successful too for a documentary, but that was more about certainly McFoley, Terry Funk, and Jake the Snake Roberts than it was about Dwayne. I won't go through every single year this time, but how about Dwayne Johnson's domestic box office totals? This isn't the Cornette Austin point, but let's look at this too. One example is 2011, which had Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 top them all domestically. Dewey's Fast 5 got as high as number 6 here at home. In 2013, The Hunger Games Catching Fire achieved the top spot here in North America. The Rock's answer was Fast and Furious 6, which was 9th. Wouldn't it be fun to see Jennifer Lawrence and The Rock do a movie together, a romantic comedy or something? Although somebody pointed this out, and I think it's still true, this beautiful hunk of a man has rarely, if ever, kissed a woman on screen. The joke kiss with Karen Gillan in Welcome to the Jungle, the first Jumanji, that might be it. Anyway, I told you Star Wars The Force Awakens ruled 2015 in other markets. Well, it did here at home, too. Rock's supporting turn in Furious 7 wasn't that far behind it. It was 5th, while San Andreas was 20th. Another Star Wars story, Rogue One, beat them all in 2016. For The Rock, it was Moana at 11 and Central Intelligence at 22. Incidentally, in a reversal from Johnson's usual trend, Central Intelligence was far more popular here at home than it was around the globe. Star Wars did it again in 2017. The Last Jedi was numero uno. For Johnson, Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle yucked its way up to 4th, while The Fate of the Furious only got to number 12. This was flipped from what happened worldwide, where Furious 8 was by far the biggest hit of the two. Marvel ruled domestically in 2019. Avengers Endgame whipped all comers, including Dwayne's Jumanji The Next Level and his Hobbs and Shaw. Those did get to 10th and 13th, so there's nothing to scoff at there, although I talked about how high those budgets were, so... Spider-Man No Way Home couldn't be beaten on this soil in 2021. What a monster that was. Meantime, the Jungle Cruise that Rock took with Emily Blunt wound up 12th. Again, though, giant budget, didn't really make its money back. And last year, 2022, just like worldwide, the domestic honey was Top Gun Maverick. Rock's Black Adam was 11th, and DC League of Super Pets was 21st. Okay, now, I said another measure of Austin Cornett's he's the biggest star argument should also include whether or not a person's movie won the weekend. So let's break down Dwayne's opening weekends domestically. Those guys are about to feel a little more vindicated with this now. People ate up The Mummy Returns and made it number 1 for 2 weeks at the beginning of May 2001. Again, not a Rock's movie, but he is in it. That film's prequel, The Scorpion King, started out great. It was number 1 for 2 weeks towards the end of April 2002, but Spider-Man annihilated it in its 3rd week, and everything else for that matter. The Scorpion King was down to 10th about a month later, although for a wrestler in his first starring role, you cannot say it was a disappointment. The Rundown probably deserved a better fate in 2003, but didn't even earn its money back, even when you account for worldwide grosses. After starting its run at number 1 here in North America at the end of September, which is usually a pretty dead time at the box office, it was 14th just 4 weeks in, as horror movies were winning weekends in October. And that's usually the way. It's funny, actually, that's a month when you get the horror movies, but you also get the prestige movies that want to win Oscars and stuff. They often clash in October. I guess they tend to save the real, true, bona fide Oscar stuff for Christmas time, the end of December, and November for that matter, Thanksgiving and so on. But October's a month where big movies come out too, and then they're up against some gory horror fest. I usually prefer the gory horror fests. Walking Tall couldn't get past Hellboy when it first saw the light of April 2004, so Walking Tall ranked 2nd that first weekend, then it slipped to 5th, 7th, 10th, and 14th as the month wore on. We know the man was back to being a supporting player in his 2 2005 releases. Be Cool didn't spend any time as the number 1 hit, but Doom did in the latter part of October. But then it was 7th just 1 week later, and 13th in its 3rd week. What a plummet. As for Be Cool, it only got as high as number 2 behind The Pacifier, which starred The Rock's future feud mate, Vin Diesel. The Get Shorty sequel was down to 9th place in its 4th week. Great cast, not a great movie, although I love Get Shorty, one of my favorite comedies of the 90s. Gridiron Gang did what most sports movies do, which is not make much money. It was number 1 that first week in mid-September 2006, but dropped to 3rd, 6th, and 8th in the next few weeks. Considering the modest budget, the game plan did very well in 2007, and even got to spend 3 weeks in first place at the end of September and into October. But as I said a minute ago, September is typically a pretty weak time at the box office, so winning weekends in the month where kids go back to school is a bit of a Pyrrhic victory. You win, Sure, it was like back in the day, maybe not so much now, but winning a February or a January, not so impressive. Not as impressive as in the summer or Christmas time, that kind of thing. Rock is in Get Smart, of course, which was number one in late June 2008. It slid back every week after that, but in fairness, Wall-E, Wanted, and Hancock were tough competition. Race to Witch Mountain got off to a good start in 2009, reaching number one when it first hit theaters in mid-March. None of the films in release right then were raking it in, though, which makes Races drop to 6th place before the calendar even turned to April. Pretty craptastic. Planet 51 was a disaster, all around, only getting as high as number 4 a week before Thanksgiving, then was not even in the top 10 by its 4th week. Now, that's a tough time of year, but still, that's pretty bad. The Other Guys was released at the beginning of August 2010, although that is Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg more than The Rock and Sam Jackson. It was easily number one before it did what most comedies do and fell off. Johnson did headline Tooth Fairy. That started in 4th place and never made any ripples on the home front, although it did cling to the top 10 for a while in the weak box office season of the late winter. Faster started in 7th place during the Thanksgiving weekend and wasn't even holding onto a spot in the top 10 just 3 weeks later. Fast 5 was only number one for 1 week at the end of April 2011 before Thor and Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides pushed it back, although the 5th fast flick did manage to stay in the top 5 for about a month and in the top 10 until the middle of June, so it had legs. It was up against some tough stuff, though. Journey 2, The Mysterious Island. So if you're not familiar with that, by the way, it's Journey number 2, The Mysterious Island, based on the first Journey something or other. Did fine in other markets, but tanked at home in 2012. It started in 3rd place in mid-February, then skidded along the next 3 or 4 weeks. Now, 2013 was a great year for The Rock when you talk about his films getting off to fast starts. In the span of 2 months, Fast and Furious 6, G.I. Joe Retaliation, and Pain and Gain all spent at least 1 week at number 1. The G.I. Joe sequel opened pretty big, then fell back as we got into April, while Pain and Gain had a modest opening, especially with names like Bay, Wahlberg, and Johnson involved, but was a little ahead of Tom Cruise's Oblivion before Iron Man 3, The Great Gatsby, and others sucked the audiences away. It was Fast and Furious 6 that was Johnson's huge moneymaker in 2013, opening number 1 and staying there for a second week. It went from number 3 to number 4 to number 6 as the calendar turned to June. Snitch was Rocky's 4th release that year, which didn't cost that much to make, so it actually did okay when you consider the budget versus what it brought in here and around the planet. It came out in the number 2 spot in late February, right behind Identity Thief, but did steadily drop after that. Hercules in 2014 was a money loser domestically. It opened in 2nd place, far back of Scarlett Johansson's loopy thriller Lucy. Then, as I recall, the fun and goofy Hercules ranked 4th, 7th, and 10th over the next several weeks. Furious 7, okay, this is very impressive. It was number 1 for 5 straight weeks in April 2015, bringing in $147 million during that first weekend alone. Avengers Age of Ultron sucked all the air and the money out of the room when it came out at the beginning of May, but Furious 7 did manage to hang around the top 10 until the end of that month. As for San Andreas, it was number 1 at the end of May, right around the time Furious 7 was petering out, and it walloped the number 2 film that weekend, Pitch Perfect 2. San Andreas dropped fast after that, going from number 2 to number 3 to number 4 to number 6 from weekend to weekend as the summer movie season got more and more competitive. Moana was number 1 for 5 weeks in a row in 2016, from the Thanksgiving weekend until mid-December. Now that is impressive too. It opened to over $80 million and still raked in more than $18 million in that 5th week. Rogue One steamrolled Moana and everything else though. Then Moana had Christmas releases to contend with too. Central Intelligence opened against Finding Dory in mid-June, which isn't really a fair fight. The Rock against the Fish. Dory brought in nearly 100 million more pieces of cheddar than Central Intelligence did that first weekend. Another Rocky comedy, Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, opened when The Last Jedi had already been in theaters for over a week, so Johnson's 2017 adventure Laugher did well considering that obstacle, but Jumanji made only about half of what the Star Wars flick did. No shade on anything that makes that much of what Star Wars did. It's Star Wars. It had good word of mouth though, because it almost beat The Last Jedi in the week leading up to New Year's. Then it did reach number 1 the weekend of January 5th, 2018, and stayed number 1 for 2 more weeks. As for The Fate of the Furious, it was number 1 for 4 consecutive weeks from mid-April until mid-May. One of his best years ever there. Rampage came out as the number 1 film in mid-April 2018, but then A Quiet Place bumped it to number 2 by about $800,000, and Rampage never got back to number 1 again. It was 4th and 5th, then only pulled in about $3 million in its 5th week. Meantime, Skyscraper came out in the middle of July, and it couldn't compete with the tough summer marketplace, getting only as high as 3rd place in its premiere weekend. Then it fell right off a cliff after that, or right off a building. Jumanji: The Next Level was number 1 for a week in mid-December 2019, but then Rise of Skywalker bumped it to number 2 the very next week. Again, Star Wars. Jumanji 2 didn't do what the first Jumanji did and recapture number 1 in the next few weeks. Back in the summer of that year, Hobbs and Shaw came out in early August, and it was number 1 for 2 weeks, but then Good Boys, a pretty funny comedy, pushed it to number 2 in its third week. In 2020, The Rock took the year off, or maybe the studio just pushed Jungle Cruise back to July 2021. Maybe that's what it was. The cruise opened to number 1 at the end of that month, but never reached number 1 again, although the film stayed in the top 5 for quite a while. Black Adam was number 1 for 3 weeks in a row just last fall, while DC League of Super Pets was number 1 for just 1 week at the end of July. That movie deserved a better fate. So yes, Dewey can certainly brag about being number 1 for a weekend, or sometimes a lot more than just one weekend. His movies often open big. Not all that many of them have long legs and keep bringing in crowds in big numbers for long periods of time, but his projects often get summer releases and face tough competition too. So that skews things. Or the movie stinks and people don't want to see it a second time, or even a first. I can practically guarantee you that The Rock would say the opinions of the critics are worthless, but let's briefly analyze Dwayne's Rotten Tomatoes numbers. He has about 15 movies with fresh reviews, but 24 movies that got rotten reviews, although Hercules and Snitch came pretty close to earning fresh tomatoes. I liked Get Smart. Audiences rated that a lot higher than critics did, by the way, but it's only at 51% on the site. I think Pain and Gain is one of the better and more interesting Michael Bay flicks, but it's only at 50%. I wouldn't say I quite liked it, but at least it was something different for him. Mr. Johnson has a slew of films that don't even get as high as that, though. In fact, Dwayne was the leading character, or a co-lead, in only 7 certified fresh movies. If you exclude the times where he played himself, and those, I can hear him right now, just if he listened to this thinking, I don't care what the critics think. Well, I'm a critic, and he doesn't care what I think, I guess. So anyway, if you exclude the times he played himself in those 2 wrestling movies, and in the Furious flicks, where his good, close personal friend Vin Diesel is the main character, then far more often than not, critics say that Dwayne Johnson as a movie star doesn't work for them. And he doesn't care. I'll give him this, though. Even though the Game Plan and Tooth Fairy aren't particularly good, Game Plan wasn't that bad, I guess. He's better when he does characters like that than Hulk Hogan or Vin Diesel ever were. When he works with little kids, he looks ridiculous, although that's the point. He's an enormous man who has to pratfall and be the butt of the joke in those kids' comedies, but it helps that he's a naturally funny guy, so you can enjoy what he's doing when he slums in those kinds of movies. One of the greatest smiles of all time, too, let's not forget that. He just seems to be enjoying himself. Hogan and Diesel never seemed to let you enjoy it when they were slumming. Rocky gets the joke. I don't think they did when they were doing those kinds of films. So when I started looking into this last year, I thought one of 2 things would happen. Either the wrestling guys would prove to be right that their former colleague was in fact as big a name as it gets in the movie business, or that they'd be way off. And the results are mixed. Dwayne Johnson has never had a movie end up number 1 or even number 2 in the world for a calendar year. He hasn't had a number 1 movie domestically for a calendar year either. But he's had plenty of huge openings. He's often won the weekend. And yes, lots of his movies have been unqualified successes. But because he's a big name, his projects also get huge budgets. So the return on investment in Dwayne Johnson isn't always worth it. Those are qualified successes, and some of those aren't even qualified if you really look at the numbers. Something like The Game Plan, yeah, very profitable for its budget. Jumanji and the sequel, especially the first one, same story, huge budgets, but what a payback, and not as big as some of the other budgets. That's even true about Pain and Gain, believe it or not. Black Adam's return on investment, though? DC League of Super Pets? Not so much. Ironically, he's more of a global star than he is a North American one, because many of his films only succeeded because of what they made internationally. That's a lot of provisos, though, for someone his friends have so often said is, say it with me, the biggest star in the world. If any of you ever run into Steve Austin or Jim Cornette, do me a favor. Screw up your courage, push your glasses back in your nose and say, "Excuse me, Stone Cold, but the actual biggest star is Tom Holland, who's been in the number 1 hit worldwide 4 times to Dwayne Johnson's 0. Also, learn how to pronounce verbiage, would you? Verbiage. Or at least tell Cornette and Pritchard and Conrad Thompson how to say it, because they're bad for it. They apparently can't do it. Just don't come across too aggressive, or Steve might punch you out, and then you'll have the biggest bunch of stars in the world circling your head. So that's that for Moana and my box office analysis of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. You'll be able to download the next podcast on this channel in 6 days. Bev and I will be back at it to hash out Yasuhiro Ozu's critically acclaimed Tokyo Story. What a change of pace that is from this. I'm not 100% on what my next solo show will be, but I'm aiming for May 19th. And if you're a wrestling fan, you might think of the mayor of Knox County in a certain horror movie when you hear the words, May 19th. Although my review will have nothing to do with Glenn Jacobs or that movie. I can't remember the name of it right now. See No Evil, that's it, See No Evil. It's probably going to be Key Largo. We'll see, sweetheart. This entire episode will soon be on YouTube, if it isn't already. Each solo show I do, though, is just the audio you hear in the podcast. Yes, it's been a while, but Bev and I have spent time on camera at the beginning of some of our YouTube videos. When we do that, we correct errors, make recommendations of films we've recently seen, and talk about major movie news, if there is any. And yes, we are overdue to fire up the iPhone again soon. Anyway, check out at HYES Ellis. So in your browser, and you'll find all of our 2023 podcasts on YouTube through that link. To communicate with us, you can hit us with some twits. I'm at MovieFiend51 on Twitter. Bev is at BevEllisEllis. Our email address is haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. Please like, subscribe, share, favorite, and tell your movie-loving friends about us. With over 500 episodes online, they and you are bound to find flicks in our archives that will interest you to hear about. And if you drink coffee and you live in Canada or the United States of America, go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES to get 20% off some premium beans. HYES is obviously Have You Ever Seen's promo code. Thanks for listening to this pedantic number crunch today. Enjoy Cinco de Mayo on Friday, and also enjoy what I hope is great weather now that we're in May. Meantime, I'm going to hope I never run into one of the wrestlers I was a little rough on today. That might biff me one. They might also say, he wins weekends! He's the biggest star! Well, yeah, true, I guess, sort of. It's qualified. Of course, The Rock would at least biff me with a charming smile on his face. That electrifying SOB. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes, I smell what he's cooking. And cut.